Douglas Brent Hegdahl, born on September 3, 1946, and graduated from Clark High School, South Dakota on May 24, 1966. He was enlisted in the U.S. Navy at the age of 19, amid the Vietnam War. Driven by a sense of duty and patriotism, Doug chose to serve his country and joined the U.S. Navy in 1966 and became a sailor aboard the USS Canberra, a mighty missile cruiser. During the intense period of the Vietnam War, from SEALs covert operations to fighter jets soaring through the sky and naval forces actively engaging in various operations, the war effort spanned across air, sea, and land. But on the gunline, it was the cruisers and frigates that stood tall, raining fire upon target positions. The USS Canberra played a crucial role in hitting communist targets with its guns. On April 6, 1967, the air throbbed with the thunderous roar of the USS Canberra's guns, spitting fire onto the enemy targets in the Gulf of Tonkin. The 20-year-old Douglas Hegdahl climbed on top of the ship's structure. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, a blast from the missile cruiser's gun mount knocked him overboard, sending him plunging into the unforgiving sea. His cries lost in the roar of the guns, unnoticed by sailors, he floated as the ship sailed away. Hours later, adrift and alone in the South China Sea, Doug was picked up by Vietnamese fishermen who then turned him over to Vietnam soldiers. Back on the USS Canberra, Doug's absence was discovered at the next rendezvous. Unaware of the young sailor's dramatic fall, and after 2 searches, he was presumed lost and officially listed as missing at sea as another casualty of the war. For the next 2 brutal years, Doug endured the harsh realities of being a prisoner of war. He faced beatings, solitary confinement, interrogations, and harsh living conditions. He was shuffled between different locations and camps, finally landing in the notorious Hanoi Hilton prison, where he met fellow POWs, Navy and Air Force pilots shot down over North Vietnam. There, he discovered his fellow prisoners' pact. He learned of their unbreakable bond, a collective refusal of freedom unless they were all free. Together or not at all, they would face their fate. Young Doug desperately tried to convince his captors he wasn't one of the downed pilots. But his pleas fell on deaf ears and their faces remained cold. They saw only an enemy and they threatened to execute him, as they accused him of being a commando or a spy, leaving him teetering on the brink of fear. Faced with the terrifying possibility of torture and realizing he was in deep trouble, young Doug Hegdahl decided to play dumb. He exaggerated his rural accent and demeanor to an extreme, so convincingly that his captors deemed him utterly useless and incredibly stupid. When given paper and pen to confess his crimes, he pretended to be in confusion, treating the pen like an alien device and claiming illiteracy. His performance was convincing, and the Vietnamese bought his act, mistaking him for a simple, uneducated peasant. But beneath the facade, Doug was anything but simple. While his act initially felt jarring alongside the other POWs who were mostly experienced aviators who outranked him, they soon discovered a hidden gem. This seemingly dim-witted young sailor possessed an exceptional memory. He silently observed everything around him, meticulously accumulating information about the camp, its routines, and his fellow prisoners. After a point, his captors didn't look at the 20-year-old Doug as a threat, so he was given the task of sweeping prison grounds. Doug would use the opportunity to communicate with other POWs and commit small acts of sabotage like pouring sand into the fuel tanks of enemy trucks so they would not operate. Douglas had a remarkable memory power and he secretly memorized the names of hundreds of fellow prisoners. This seemingly insignificant act proved invaluable to the U.S. government and would provide families back home with the much-needed hope. The Vietnamese had attempted to release some American POWs, prematurely for their own propaganda purposes. However, they did so with a chilling threat: any released POW who dared to speak out about the torture they endured would see their comrades suffer even more. This created a terrifying dilemma for the prisoners. Unlike many of his senior officer POWs, Douglas Hegdahl was deemed worthless by his captors in terms of intelligence. Ironically, this worthlessness made him one of the first offered an early release. When offered an early release, Doug knew he couldn't leave his comrades behind, so he refused release, choosing to endure further captivity for the sake of his fellow POWs. But his memory held the key to their identities and locations, crucial information for potential negotiations and rescue efforts. He became a hero in the eyes of the other POWs, gathering crucial information that would prove vital in their fight for survival and eventual release. Torn between loyalty and duty, Doug Hegdahl was ultimately persuaded by a POW who was a senior officer higher in rank. He understood that his early release could bring relief to many. With a heavy heart, he accepted the offer, carrying with him the burden of his comrades' suffering and the hope of a brighter future. Doug Hegdahl was one of the 3 POWs who were released on August 5, 1969, as a propaganda move by the North Vietnamese. After spending 852 days as a prisoner of war in captivity, stepping out of the prison gates, he carried not just the scars of his own suffering, but the hopes and lives of countless others. He would become a voice and a beacon of truth amidst the darkness of captivity. Doug Hegdahl's return to the United States wasn't just a homecoming. This young sailor, dismissed by his captors as insignificant, carried within him a truth that would shake the nation. He held within him the names of over 256 American POWs, many presumed dead, etched into his memory like scars. These weren't just numbers, they were fathers, sons, brothers. Each name represented a life, a family left in agonizing limbo. Families who had mourned lost loved ones were now faced with a glimmer of hope, a possibility that their sons, fathers, and brothers are still alive. But Doug's knowledge wasn't limited to names. His revelations were explosive. He was a witness, an unwilling participant in a harrowing reality. He carried the scars, both physical and emotional, of the torture and brutal conditions inflicted on the POWs. His first-hand accounts, previously kept silent under threat of further suffering, were about to break the silence. Doug's voice, amplified by his courage and unwavering memory, became a megaphone for the silent suffering of his comrades. The world now had a glimpse into the hell endured by their captured soldiers, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. The Paris peace talks in 1970 were held in secrecy, where North Vietnamese negotiators denied all accusations of prisoner abuse. But Doug Hegdahl, a former POW from captivity, wouldn't let their web of lies and denial stand. He stood before them, not as a defeated soldier, but as a living testament to their brutality. In a voice that resonated with the truth etched in his memory, he called out their deceit. He spoke of the torture, the inhumane conditions, the suffering he and his fellow POWs endured. His words, a searing indictment, shattered the facade of denial. Doug's accusation wasn't just a personal act of courage, it was a strategic blow. It exposed the North Vietnamese lies to the world, stripping them of their carefully constructed narrative. The international community, previously hesitant to condemn, found its voice. Pressure mounted, and the tide began to turn. Unflinching in the face of his former captors, Doug's testimony at the Paris peace talks exposed their torture of POWs, a pivotal moment that pressured them to release American prisoners. But Doug didn't stop there. He used his experience as an instructor to train new generations of soldiers at the Navy's Survival, Resistance, and Escape School at NAS North Island in San Diego, empowering them with the knowledge he gained through hardship. It was a fitting capstone to a career marked by extraordinary resilience and dedication. His actions were recognized with the Prisoner of War Medal in 1985, but his true legacy lies in the countless lives he touched. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a truth-bearer, a symbol of hope in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Douglas Hegdahl proved that even in the darkest hour, a hero can emerge. The incredibly stupid one proved to be an incredibly courageous one. He was incredibly brave, and his story serves as an inspiration to all who face adversity.